We want to begin the session. Although we're all spread across different parts of Ontario, we still wanted to do a land acknowledgement, recognizing that we're gathered in the territories of various Indigenous peoples, and also recognizing their stewardship of these lands in which we live, learn, work, and play. And on a day like today, when the snow is falling, we really do feel lucky to be here and to live in such beauty. I am the lucky person who gets to introduce Anne Lopez, Dr. Anne Lopez, who I have known for a very long time and who I have such incredible admiration for. I had told Anne that I might take down her actual written bio. I will put it into the chat box afterwards so that you all can take a look at it. But I thought it was so incredible. I just wanted to take a few moments to acknowledge so many of Anne's fantastic accomplishments. As many of you will know, she is a professor of educational leadership and policy program at OISE. She's also director of the Center for Leadership and Diversity at and provostial advisor on access programs. Now, I wanted to know if anybody else had ever seen the word provostial. I know what that means. That means to the provost, right? So very impressive. And I want to say, because I'm so proud that I've worked with you for a very long time and you're one of the best and incredible educators I know. Anne was in fact a secondary school teacher and an administrator. And I know that she has always brought that to her teaching at OISE. So it's just been an incredible experience for me working with you, Anne, and getting to know you. I think that your scholarship is incredible. You focused on anti-racist education, culturally responsive leadership, decolonizing education, equity and diversity, and school leadership. Your book, which I can hardly wait to see, is called Decolonizing Educational Leadership, Exploring Alternative Approaches to Leading Schools. So that is going to be really fun to take a look at. You know, in addition to being the immediate past president of the National Association for Multicultural Education and co-editor of all kinds of publications, Anne is the recipient in 2020 of the Award for Distinguished Contributions to Teaching at OISE. Now, if that doesn't say a lot, what does? So without any further ado, I am going to stop sharing and I am going to officially hand you all over into the capable hands of Dr. Anne Lopez. Thanks for being with us, Anne.
Thank you so much, Lindy. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so it's just great to see everyone, almost 108 participants from all across Ontario. So that means we have amazing energy in the space, because this in of itself is a space. So I can't thank you all enough. Thank you, Linda, for inviting me into the space and to really be sharing some ideas around how we can make lives better for some of our students who are not necessarily achieving as they should. It's all about keeping students at the center of what we do. So I know we have an hour and we'll do the best to ensure that we use that wisely, that when you walk away from this webinar today, that you'll take something with you that you can share, you can add on, you can build on. And of course, really, it's about making the educational experience for all of our students that much better. And that's why I do the work. And that's why I try every day to make my grandmother proud. And of course, to be a proud Grammy myself. So let me, first of all, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to share my slide because it's really going to be a conversation, a dialogue, and hopefully folks will ask questions. I'll share how we can do that and turn on your camera at any time, jump in at any time. This is not watch and get. This is really us having a true dialogue. So one thing I want to say, where I am, I'm also having lots of snow and my internet might become unstable every now and then. So what I might do is switch my camera off just to save a little bit of a bandwidth. So I'm going to share my screen in just a second here and then take us through. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Maybe I will put it in
We can
slideshow
see,
mode.
and
Can you see?
we
Can
can
you
see
see?
it. Yeah, it's not yet in display mode.
Okay, sure. Let me get there. But you can see it.
We sure can.
Okay, perfect. And I can see you as well. So this is working just fine. So let me move right along. And as I've said, what we're going to be talking about today is ways in which we can embed anti-racism work, education in what we do in our everyday practices, move and really build on what many teachers have been doing. And this is really, sometimes when I'm teaching, I say this is a juiceful moment. There's nothing more exciting in education than really being able to respond to changes and to really use that energy in what we do. So again, hope grab a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, some lemon juice, whatever it is, to keep that energy going. It's very important. I always say to folks, you know, when we do this work, we must be relaxed. We must look like we're having fun. We must enjoy it, because when we do good by other people's children, it is a joyful moment. So right off the top, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me in the space. Thank you for wanting to hear what I have to share. And I want to say that I enter the space with utmost humility. It is a humility that to share, to learn, and so it's just really just so very. I it's an honor. So thank you all for doing that. Thank you, Lindy. So the first thing I want to share, and what I'm going to be doing as I engage in the conversation, is really to share some of my own thinking, some of my own strategies. You know, I remember when I did teacher ed back in the day, I had a geography teacher, and he would say to us as teacher candidates, you know, when you come to teachers college, it's like a basket, like you're going to the shopping the supermarket. Take some things out, you're going to put some things in. So I'm going to share some of the ways in which I engage in this work, and we're focusing on specifically on anti-Black racism. And some folks might have some questions around, why do we focus on anti-Black racism specifically? Why not racism? So what any of those questions that we have, we'll talk about that today. But I have been doing this for a long time, and the way I approach teaching and learning, and by the way, I never just said teaching alone, teaching and learning, is that I do so with humility, and that I'm always ready and willing to learn. So that is something that is so important in terms of my philosophy and how I do this work. So now I have an activity for everyone. I hope everybody brought a piece of paper and we're ready to go. And before we get to the end of this activity, well, let's do the activity first, and then we talk about it. So this is the Zoom version of this activity. If you have done it before, just go along with us. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, first of all, is you don't have to close your eyes because we're not in a room anymore, but close your eyes, just close your eyes. It's really a lot more fun when we close our eyes. What I'd like you to do with your piece of paper is to fold it in half. Then tear off the upper right-hand corner. With your eyes closed, tear off the upper right-hand corner. Now fold it in half again. And fold it in half one more time. Now tear off the upper left-hand corner with your eyes closed. Don't look. And now what I'd like everybody to do, those who are able to turn on their cameras, turn on your camera and show us what you created. Hold it up to the screen so we can see what you created. Okay, that's amazing. Now, if you have it, look at what everybody's created. We all got the same instructions, but we all created something different. And this is what this work is about. We all got the same instructions, but we all interpreted it, did it differently, and we all came up with something else. And this activity is really so important for me, at least in the way that we do the work. And it's that we're all kind of going to the same place. We all have the same kind of goals, but sometimes we might get there a little bit differently. And that is what hopefully will symbolize today's workshop. So any comments you have to this activity, please put it in the chat, and we can talk about that as well. And so, but what I say is that what we've come up with really represents life in schools. This is what it is like in a school, that really teachers are going, we have parents, we have community, everybody's trying to get to the same goal, but oftentimes we maybe get there differently. So that was is an activity that I use, and something that you can use as well. Lindy, are you going to be monitoring the chat to see if there's anything in the chat that I need to respond to?
I am
Okay.
monitoring, so don't worry. Lots of happy thoughts about the activity, and a great activity to do with students.
Yes, absolutely. And really, just to let students know that there are different perspectives, but it's okay, and to sort of help them to think through what might that be. So getting to the focus of today, anti-Black racism. So before we sort of go on to the rest of the workshop, it's so important that we have some agreements. And funny enough, I found myself in another meeting today with the dean talking about agreements and how do we ground the conversation. So I think one of our starting point has to be that anti-Black racism exists, and that it's a troubling phenomenon in education and schooling. And for a long time we talked about diversity and equity and social justice and culturally responsive work, and all of those are good ideas. But in education, we really didn't identify and name. So the first process is naming, because we cannot fix what we cannot name. And so it's so important to name anti-Black racism. And why is that? That is because we know from data, we know from research, and we know from speaking, particularly to Black students, their narratives. They have told us that through their stories, through the research, that there are systemic things within the system that is preventing them from achieving to their fullest. And it's really, this is when we say it's about impact, not intent. Because really and truly, I always say to teacher candidates when I was a teacher educator, no teacher gets up in the morning and make a list of who they are going to oppress during the day. Absolutely not. But when we listen to students, sometimes what we intend is not the way that the experiences are received. And that is so valuable. And so Black students have told us for a long time, and as myself as a Black educator, in higher ed, I have also experienced anti-Black racism in many, 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 many ways. That when I share, folks might say, but I didn't know, and that is how you are experiencing it. So that's so important to ground what we're doing and to ground our conversation, and to recognize that this is systemic. And the question then is, if we know that, what can we do about it? But we all know as educators, we do not tell students something for one time and they get it. It really is about making this into habit, making it into practice. It's about having that philosophy, that understanding, and then on a daily basis, thinking through how is this reflected in my practice. It's not being about perfect. It's not who is going to be the anti-Black racism czar. It's really about that work that we know that needs to happen so that students can have greater achievement. And so it's really about teachers' practices changing to ensure better outcomes for Black students. And that's what anti-Black racism, particularly within the context of schooling and teaching and learning, at least in my mind, is all about. Also an agreement that, and this is something that we've talked about for a long time. I was one of the writers back in, I worked at the Peel District School Board in 2000 when we did the Future We Want, building inclusive curriculum. And really that work was about how do we embed this? How do we sort of make it become part of what we do, the thinking? And so a lot of teachers oftentimes say, and we're being asked to do more and more on top of what we are already doing. And that is making it difficult and challenging. And so it's so important that anti-racist education, anti-Black racism, challenging that becomes part of everyday practice, not on top of. And how does it become part of what we do and not part and not an add-on? It becomes part of what we do when we recognize that that is in itself good and effective teaching, and really that it will make teaching better for students and really makes it almost organic in the thinking and the way that students experience their teaching and learning. So it's so very important. We're not asking folks to go out and move mountains. We're saying, think about your English, think about your math, think about geography, think about the hallway, think about tone, think about speaking with mom or dad or Grammy, and what does that look like, and make that be part of practice. And so of course what we're doing is not new. I know, in 2020, there's a lot about anti-racist ed and Ibrahim Kendi's work, but folks like George Day and others have been doing anti-racist ed for a long time. My own doctorate back in 2005 was framed through anti-racist education. So this is not new, but I remember back in the day when if we said anti-racist education, it would not have been received in the way it's being received now. So it's a good moment. Lots of work to do, but I say to where we were 15, 20 years ago, we are making some progress even to have this webinar. So for me, it is about learning more. It is about unlearning some bad practices and habits and thinking. And it's about relearning and reframing. And really, as I've said before, having fun. It's doing the work must be fun. It must make us feel good in our souls. That's so very important. And so let me just quickly give an example of what I use my own self sort of as an example of what I mean on learning. I'm originally from Jamaica, and I was raised, with my mother, my father, aunts, uncles, and my grandmother. And really, when I grew up in Jamaica, um, there is a way that we think about how students should behave, how 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 they should learn, how they should sit in a classroom. And when I started teaching here in Ontario, some of those habits and ways that I was brought up in a colonial schooling project in Jamaica, I slowly had to unlearn. I slowly had to unlearn those ways of students being and begin to learn more collaborative, more cooperative ways of being. I also had to learn, as I reflected on ways in which my own class position was sort of reflected in the ways that I relate to students. What were my expectations of them? What was I layering on from my own socialization? So that's an example of sort of the learning, the unlearning, hopefully, as educators, we engage in. So as I've said before, the focus is on students. So today there's a lot of talk as we engage in critical work, and if you spend time on Twitter like I do, there's all kinds of wonderful ideas and around creating safe spaces and brave space. And so I hope today that for us here in this webinar, it will be a brave space. And we can't decree something to be a safe space and make it so, but we can collectively decide that this is a space where all questions can be posited, where ideas can be challenged, and we have that dialogic interaction. However, I think for our students, and something to think about as we do anti-racism work and anti-Black racism work and challenge that, the question then, and I really do like to use a lot of questioning in my thinking and the ways that I engage. The question I'm hoping then for all of us on this webinar is, in my everyday teaching, how are Black students feeling in the space? How are Black students feeling in the space? That's the first question that I would suggest. The second question is, how do I know how they're feeling? The reason for that being, students will not tell us how they're feeling unless there is a relationship. So those are some of the questions as we begin to think about our classrooms as a space. We're now into online and sort of learning. That is a space. As we begin to say that we're intentionally challenging anti-Black racism, we're intentionally working to undo some of the damage that has been done. Begin to think about how are these students feeling in the space that I am responsible for as the teacher, and how do I know that how they're feeling. So I'm going to leave those, and maybe we can have some conversations about that. Maybe there's something in the chat that we can talk about, because we know that oftentimes Black students, for a variety of reasons, might experience some dissonance with their teachers, and not have the language or be able to say, this is how I'm feeling. So that is something I think, as we talk about space and work towards disrupting anti-Black racism. So one of the things that I do in the work that I do, I use a little bit of technology to help folks to create that brave space. So one of the things I do now in my own work, I never ask anyone to be vulnerable in a space unless they're ready. So I have used, and some of you might use Socrative as well. It's a well-known tool. And so what I do, it's anonymous. So I'm going to minimize my screen. I'm going to then put up the Socrative room that I'd like you to go into with instructions. And I would like you to type into the question some of the issues that you'd like to talk about, to discuss, so it will help to guide this organic conversation. So I am going to stop sharing, and then I am going to just for a moment, let me, okay. So
Okay,
first of all, do you, let me, just a second. Uh-oh. Okay. Let me share the information first. Let me do that. Can you see it, Lindy?
No, not yet. You have to go back to
So
share
first
screen.
of
Oh,
all,
it's coming.
this is where I'd like, yeah, there we go. So if folks could go here to Socrative, go to the student login, and all you have to do is enter my room number, Spence 6984. When you go there, there will be a question waiting. And all you will need to do is to enter your questions. It's all anonymous. This is a way to, it's a method that we can use as well in our classrooms as we're working and with our teachers, with our colleagues, with the EAs, with the, and all of the folks that we work with in terms of sort of helping students. So did everybody get that? I'm now going to stop
Just
sharing
put it,
this.
hold on a second,
And then
don't stop sharing yet, Anne, because I just put the link into the chat, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows
okay. Sorry
your
about that.
actual number, because I know that it goes quickly. So I'm just putting Spence 6984, and those are all caps, right, Anne?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so now people should be able to pick up that link from, hopefully I did it right, from the chat and go there.
Okay. And just type in the issues, the topics, and it's really great, Lindy, because if we do not get through all of this today, you will have these issues to work with as you work with teachers. Can I minimize now and go see what's in the chat, Lindy?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
You may want to give people a little more time to get there, because I was a little slow with putting it into the chat.
Okie dokie. Oh, it's all there. So can you let me share my screen again?
Perfect.
Oops, go away soon. Okay, let me share. And there we go, share. Everyone should be able to see the questions that are being asked.
Oh,
There we
that's
go.
awesome. Thank you, Anne. That really worked well.
And it's really anonymous. It's really, and so remember, it's about when we're doing this work, it's not sort of pontificating to folks. It's really responding to their genuine questions. And folks, put in this the questions that you might not be able to ask in a staff meeting or in a meeting where you have to be on spot. You know, I say, Lindy, to folks now when I go, sorry, I'm not going to be vulnerable today. I'm sorry, I'm not going there. So this way it allows folks to ask. Look at all the questions we have, Lindy.
Oh my
See?
gosh,
So
we
I'm
will
going
be
to
here
go
for a
through a
long
few
time.
and I will come back to them at the end.
And may I just ask you a
So I'm
question
just
before
gonna,
you
so I
start?
have a Black student and she's having problems, but I can't figure out what those problems are, and she doesn't. Mhm.
Sorry, Anne.
Go ahead, Lindy.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you about Socrative. Is it a free app?
Yes.
And so our own teachers could be using this in their classes to ask their teachers to
Yes.
ask their students
Yes.
anonymous questions. Awesome.
Yes. Yes, and as a matter of fact, you can use it for an exit ticket. You can do a quiz. This is what we call short answer. So there are many things that you can do. So I'm thinking I might just throw away the PowerPoints I had for today, Lindy, and just respond to these questions.
As you like, lots of wonderful questions coming up.
So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to I'm going to stop sharing this, quickly go through the slides and leave us time to come back to answers to these questions, because I think this is where the deep learning is, in
Awesome.
the deep dialogue. Does that work, Lindy?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. So I am going to stop share, and then I'll come back to the Socrative in a little bit. I'm just going to share the slides and go through that, and then I'll come back to those questions because that's important. Wow, lots of amazing questions. So again, so in terms of doing anti-racism work, for those who are comfortable, you can put something in the chat. Something else I'd like everybody to do after today, Lindy, is to have a journal, is to really begin to write down the things that they're trying, and to write down some of the challenges that they're having, some of the things that they're wrestling with. So hopefully maybe a year from now we come back and we really have a conversation about what worked, what didn't work, and so on. So in terms of, I'm going to skip over this slide because I think folks, we already talked a little bit about that to save some time, and I'm watching the time, that really anti-Black racism is prejudice, it's attitudes, it's beliefs, it's stereotyping, it's discrimination directed at people of African descent. And again, I'm going to ask participants to think about this. Please think about this. Don't have to be vulnerable. Put it in your journal. One of the things I used to do with teacher candidates, I would get a little close when I taught a course called School and Society, and I would say, you're in the school. It is 5 o'clock, just you and the custodian. And you see 3 Black students coming down the hallways, 3 tall Black men, one you know, 2 you don't know. What do you feel in the pit of your stomach? What do you feel? And why? And when we have those conversations, oftentimes folks will say, we feel fear. But the reason we feel fear when we see 3 Black men coming towards us is because we've been socialized in many ways. They haven't done anything to us. You know, 3 of any other kind of persons could be just as good, joyful, or just as harmful. So again, but those are the things I'd like teachers today who are on this webinar to write down in your journal, electronic or on your phone, in your notes. What are some of the attitudes and the prejudices that you hold, not when you're at school, but when you're home at the dinner table, when nobody's listening, when you're with your group? We all know that. We all come home and we all talk. When we're talking, what exactly happens there? The second thing quickly is that, it is embedded and evidence through our enslavement and colonization. Of course, it's deeply embedded in Canadian institutions. If you were listening last night, a research out of UBC, out of British Columbia, where Indigenous folks are, the healthcare system is so racist against Indigenous people. So it's in the things that we do. It's anti-Black racism has been normalized. It shapes our thinking, it shapes our actions, and sometimes even unconsciously, you see a Black man and you hold your purse, almost like a reflexive action. That is anti-Black racism. And so the question for us then, how might some of these things be translated into our interactions with students? So we don't have to talk about this, but I'd like folks to put it in their journals, keep it as a reflection. And every day when you sit at your desk, when you go to talk to the mom or the dad or the uncle or the student, just that, you know what, let me just think quickly. It just how, I am engaging in this interaction. And one of the things I quickly would like to do for our colleagues today is to really, now we're talking about anti-Black racism and anti-racist education and anti-oppressive and culturally responsive. I just want folks to know that all of the work that we've done on culturally responsive pedagogy is not thrown away. There are convergences, there are synergies, and with we keep students in the middle, we can find ways of when we engage in CRP, which is about academic excellence, political social consciousness, and really a positive attitude towards culture. What does that look like when we sort of are name and are being more intentional around anti-Black racism and anti-racism work? So now I'm going to get to some of the strategies, some of the ways in which I'm suggesting that teachers can embed this in their everyday work. So the first part of what I talked about was the philosophy. That's important. The naming, the grounding, the reflecting, the sort of going into the thought, the thinking through, asking the questions. Now, what about some of the strategies and actions? So for me, as I say, it's doing more than talking. It's doing more than the diversity and equity work. It's really about those practices. So first thing, at least in the work that I do, and I had to do this for myself, I am on the journey of decolonizing my own mind. Um, so it begins with self. So I see this work in sort of two lanes. One is about the self that I'm going to do with myself. I'm going to be doing the readings. I'm going to be talking with my colleagues. I'm going to be doing that work. I'm going to be thinking about all the ways in which I interact with students. I'm going to be thinking about my assessment strategies. I'm going to be thinking about my evaluation strategies. I'm going to be thinking about that student that I really didn't know what to say to, that I just left sitting at the back of the room, that I took the path of least resistance because I'm really a little bit afraid of mom and her mouth, or what of the things that we encounter that we do not know how to unpack to get beyond where we are. So that's the self. And then there's a collaborative piece, I think, that we also do with our colleagues as we're doing this work, because I believe that this work cannot be done just as an individual endeavor. If you're in a school and you're the only one doing anti-racist work in your classroom, absolutely, there's agency within your teaching and learning context. But what happens in the larger milieu of the school? So this is a little thing that I use. I call it NOFS. It's a little framework. Please take it, use it, and just cite and Lopez. First of all, is this a whole idea of self-agency? Name it. So which is what we're doing today. So that's great. Then we have to own it. And by owning it, it's really asking those deep questions. Am I complicit? Have I been silent? In what ways I've been complicit and silent? What can I do about that now that I've been open up to this new way of thinking and really thinking that I've been doing? Maybe some things in my practice. So it's that relearning. Then we have to frame it, engage in actions intentionally and purposefully. And what might those be? And boy, this has to be sustained. All of us who have been in education for a long time know our profession. It's almost every year we have another policy, we have another set of things, and here we go again. And I think folks are recognizing that we're burning out teachers on the constant treadmill of policy implementation. So really the question is, how do we sustain this critical anti-racist ed, challenge anti-Black racism? So 10 years from now, we're not reinventing the wheel, we're evaluating how to improve. So please feel free to take a picture of this or something. And so this is my sort of framework. I have it where you start at the lower end, then as you name it, then you begin to own it and you're working out. And you might be at different spaces, and then you work out of the framing, and then it becomes a sustaining, and then you loop back again. And maybe you can do this with your colleagues. So I'm going to skip over Socratic for your questions right now because we have so many the first time, and I'm watching um, the time. So what are some of the ways in which we name it and that we can go about everyday practices? We've talked about the unlearning, we've talked about the self. A lot of this is, why are we here? Why are we taking up this work? And I know for many teachers, it's because they want to do better by kids. But there's some things that we need to maybe beyond all of the webinars is to do that work around. What is white supremacy? How is anti-Black racism a manifestation of white supremacy, whiteness? We talk about brown complicity. Scholars like Vidya Shaw and Dr. Hervin Singh and others or South Asian talks about brown complicity, and this whole idea that, you know, many folks engage in anti-Blackness. It's not a black-white binary all the time. We talk about white adjacent. We talk about all of these things that perpetuate anti-Blackness. So it's so important to understand anti-Black racism within these larger contexts. And finally, your positionality. Now, I have here positionality as a white teacher doing anti-Black racism work, but it could be positionality as a South Asian teacher, an Asian teacher. Positionality, I call this, of a colonialized mind Black teacher. Because if somebody's a Black teacher, it doesn't mean that they're going to understand this work. They can still have a colonial mindset and really be perpetuating practices that can also be harmful to Black students. So this is what I mean by naming, and these are some of the strategies to do that. Lindy, just jump in if there's anything in the chat for me to
You're doing fine, and
respond to.
we have some good comments in the chat, but no questions at this point. I think all of the questions.
So to carry on,
yeah.
Okay, and I'm watching the time, and so here in the own it now in this everyday practice, you know, we cannot disrupt and the practice remains the same. And so again, some of the things that I'd like teachers to think about who are on this webinar today is, how are we lovingly redirecting students? You know, I don't use the word discipline. You know, now I say, how are we lovingly redirecting? Does discipline feel to Black kids like policing? When you see them gathering on the hill or out in the play yard, if they're in the elementary school, you know, my granddaughter came home to me and said, they're 12, says, oh, Grammy, I'm so scared because the principal thinks that I'm not going to say the child's name, ex-child and I are up to some things because we're walking home. This is my grandkids coming home telling me they're afraid to be seen with this little boy because the principal is going to think that they're getting in trouble. That is anti-Black racism. My granddaughter should not have to feel that way. So, and they would come home and tell me all these stories about what's happening in their school. And so again, how are we lovingly redirecting things? And I can tell us folk teachers, students know it, they feel it. Then I have what I call the belly feel activity. That is really, when you see Black students, what do you feel in your soul? When, you know, particularly when they're 15, 16, and when you see them, do you really say to yourself, oh my goodness, there is my astronaut? Or do we really begin to think about, boy, they must be up to no good? Even if we're not acting on it, we're thinking it. So we all need to grab the walkie-talkie or whatever, run outside and see what they're doing. Or how do we approach them thinking that they might be actually, you know, having a puzzle. And the other piece of this is, which I think in this era, sometimes when I talk to teachers, they really aren't sure now how to redirect Black kids. A lot of teachers, I think, now are being afraid of being called racist. So they don't know what to say to Black kids, and sometimes when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And how do I do that in a way in which a student will understand that I care and I'm lovingly redirecting? I say that comes out of the relationships, that comes out of the relationships that we build with students, where we're respectful, they trust us, they understand, we mean what we say what we mean. I think it's also important for us to recognize the harm that we do to students sometimes. So that's the owning it part. And I'm going to skip over the Socrative. So, some ways in which students experience anti-Black racism, and I'd like all of us on this webinar to think through this. Please, it's an incomplete list. Add to this. So, when we're framing it into your everyday practice now, these are the things that teachers do and in everyday life. So, from, add on to what you're already doing. So, when I'm speaking to Black kids, what language do I use? I've tweeted some time ago on Twitter that, the word we use, disadvantaged kids, and all of these things, it positions all of this kind of deficit approach. What is the language? What does that look like? Whether it's in a kindergarten class, or it's in a grade 12 class, or it's in between. The curriculum. And, there's a lot of sort of theorizing around, we say students must be able to see themselves in the curriculum. When it comes to challenging anti-Black racism, how are we going to adjust the curriculum so that students can begin to see their experiences? A lot of this takes a little bit of work at the start of the semester and maybe as we go. So this is embedding. But once we do it once, it's really kind of updating as we go. When I was a secondary school teacher, at Heart Lake Secondary School in Brampton, I gave my class an activity to do around entrepreneurship way back when. And they had to investigate entrepreneurs who were not white, so Asian, women, and Black. That was when we discovered that it was a Black man who invented the Sure Shot machine that puts cream into people's coffee at Tim Hortons. The students didn't know, and I didn't know. So again, how do we do that? The other piece I want to say here is that something that I really think that is missing in the Ontario curriculum, and I know scholars like Natasha Henry and others are working towards this, is this idea. A lot of Black students, and this is not just for Black students, for white students as well, and Asian and South Asian students, they don't understand the history of our ancestry, that our history didn't begin with slavery. It goes way back before slavery, where there were great African civilizations and history and math and all of that. All of those things need to be in the curriculum: assessment, pedagogy, um, you know when you're doing the evaluation, what kind of philosophy, are there biases and stereotypes? These are things, hopefully, if you're doing it already, great, please keep doing it. But as we go now, when you meet together in your department meetings, or we're talking, I don't know if they still do student promotions, what exactly is being brought to the table, why the student got 48 and not 60? I saw it in my entire career, where teachers held the line. Oh no, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, and now we're going to punish with the 2 marks. So these are ways in which, and keep in mind, folks, that if we prevent a student from graduating, we are impacting their life's chances for 2 marks. So some things to think about: the expectations. Do Black students feel that the teachers think that they can be great? They can be great, that they have greatness within them. And what does that look like? And I don't mean Black History Month dancing on stage. It's not just entertainment. It's not just being, sports. I've always asked when I was a teacher, why are so few Black kids in physics for you? Black people can do science. It is because it's so sometimes so natural and easy for teachers to encourage Black kids to to play basketball, but do not see their potential when it comes to physics and chemistry and all of those things. So those are the everyday actions. And maybe become advocates in your school, in our schools. Go say, no, 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 we don't have enough Black kids in this class. What are we going to do about it? Because if the Black kids are not in the physics class, the chemistry class, they're not going to get to university. They will not be the professors, and the cycle continues.
And
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. There was a little side conversation going on in the chat about.
I can't hear you, Lindy.
Sorry, there's a side conversation.
I think I'm having weak internet.
Could be just a side conversation between about the differences between equal and equitable. Can you just comment on when we use equal and when we use equitable?
Absolutely. And so first of all, I don't have my book here with me, but there's a book that I'm going to send for you, Lindy, where I actually do a whole piece on that. It's called Transformative Pedagogies for Teacher Ed. So equal really is where you share things where you give the same numbers, you give the same amount. So that's, so for example, it's about making sure that everybody gets an even amount. So if we're, let us say for argument's sake, we're sending students to, let us say an opportunity comes up to send students to the U of T for a summer program. And everybody says, okay, we're sending 10 students, and we just take 10 students and we go. Equity means asking that other question. How are we going to support those students who historically have not had these opportunities? And it might mean, therefore, you might have to send 8 Black students and 2 other students, because traditionally and historically, enough Black students have not gone. That's equity. Equity is about making decisions around what is needed to address. Today we're talking about is a corrective measure. It's correcting the historical barriers, and really it means that it will not always be equal. Let me give another quick example. Let us say you have a staff and you're hiring. You have a staff, it's 100 folks, and you're hiring an extra teacher. You maybe have, 90 white, or so you maybe have 2 Black teachers. Equity means you might have to intentionally hire another Black teacher and be upfront and be intentional about it. So equity oftentimes means that taking actions that might to address historical wrongs and historical barriers that might feel to some that they have to give up a little bit. And that is absolutely correct, because right now we're seeing it in universities. So that's the difference between equity and equality.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
However, one quick thing, equity though, Lindy, leads to equality. In fact, when things are more equitable, we'll have greater equality.
That's awesome.
So,
thank you.
Anything else in the chat?
Lots and lots of comments, but we can just keep going because I would really like to get to all those questions.
Yes. And you know what I think I might do, Lindy? The how, I think some of the how that I have here might come out in those questions. So do you mind I stop sharing and go to the questions? And if anything, I can always sort of take the things off the slide for you.
I think that's awesome. Go right ahead to the questions.
Yes, because we are all good teachers, so we respond to the needs of what folks need. Okay, wonderful. So let me go back here, and then I have to go to share, and I'll take up those questions. Where's my Socrative? Okay, now I need to open it up. Move that away. Come on now, behave. Oh, here it is. Okay. All right. It's not coming. I'm not getting. Can you see it? Can you see it, Lindy?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, wonderful. Ah, success. Yeah, let's all clap. Success. Okay. So the first question is, and we have lots of them, Lindy. I'll copy them off and send to you. Given COVID regulations, it's sometimes challenging to have intimate, meaningful conversations about anti-racism outside of a community circle environment. Do you have any suggestions or, oh, something just came up. Do you have any suggestions or strategies to engage adolescents in this type of meaningful dialogue? I'm assuming here that is because of online learning. I don't know what the person means, because it just means that you can't get together. It means that folks cannot come into the
Can you
school.
read it one more time?
It says, given COVID regulations, it's sometimes challenging to have intimate, meaningful conversations about anti-racism outside of a community circle environment. Any suggestions or strategies to engage adolescents in this more in this type of meaningful dialogue? So what I would suggest for this, I have always felt sometimes to let and I'm assuming here that it means you can't bring people into the office, you can't, the COVID doesn't allow us to get together. So I think there's a way in which teachers can build relationships with students and their families by whether it's reaching out, calling telephones. But I often also, in the classwork, I have sometimes found to let the text do the talking, sometimes bring stories and then discuss it, really and find a way of building that relationship with the student. Maybe it's one-on-one, maybe as I said, it's telephone calls because COVID doesn't allow us to get together, but really find that extra way of reaching out and asking. I think sometimes as educators, we don't ask enough. We kind of sort of plan a plan of action, go for it. Ask, say, we really would like to get to talk to your family or to mom or dad or uncle or granny. How could we do this? So I think that's a suggestion I would make for that. How do I convince colleagues to replace Lord of the Flies with we've had all these conversations around changing text. Goodness gracious, all I'm going to say to this, knowledge resides in every human being, in every culture. And remember now, whiteness, white supremacy, coloniality meant that Eurocentric knowledge is what was foregrounded and valued in schools. So I don't know why teachers would still be resistant. Who created these canons? Who said Shakespeare was the only human that ever walked on earth that could write? Those notions are really ways in which the colonial structure, white supremacy, maintained Eurocentric knowledge and what is valid as knowledge. And so it's time that other knowledges are valid and brought into this space. So that's one way of engaging with that resistance. It is this idea that some teachers believe that this is a canon and this is what's going to show structure of reading or all that kind of stuff. It might take some time, but folks will have to come to realize that other kind of knowledges must be valued. Understanding that Black sometimes means culture and not just skin color, and working to understand and accept differences. I'm going to beg to disagree. Black is not a culture. Black is a self-identification based on, well, of course, we all know race is a social construct, but Black is people of African ancestry. It's not a culture. Jamaican is a culture. Black is not a culture. Black identifies people of African descent. And we come in different range and colors. We're in different contexts. So Black people are in Brazil, they're in, Jamaica, they're in the US. So of course, those contexts might impact how we understand and how we engage. But when I get into the plane or in the car and go across the whole world, nobody knows I'm Jamaican until I open my mouth. They don't know my religion. They don't know my sexuality, but they see my African ancestry based on my hair and my melanin. So yeah, that's the response.
That was actually my question. Could I actually follow up on what I meant by that? Because maybe like, I'm gonna put my camera on, actually ignore my background, but I'm actually, oh, it's my cat. Okay, so I'm gonna actually follow up on what I meant by that. So there's a specific event that I'm thinking of, that my sister told me. Like, she's a nurse in the LA Children's Hospital, and basically what happened one day is because she works with a lot of little babies who sometimes they don't make it, sometimes their parents or whatever are really, really frustrated, whatever. And so in that context, with the family there, a lot of her coworkers were kind of, I don't know, like ripping on the family, whatever, saying that they were just kind of like freaking out. They were like, they were really, really high energy, like complaining about how that family was expressing themselves. So I I know me personally, like I'm half like I was born in where was I born? I was born in like Canada, but like my dad's from Jamaica, and like my mom's parents and like my mom's family are Ghanaian. So like yeah, I definitely understand what you said. There's probably a better way to phrase that. But like I know in a lot of different cultures whose, I guess, appearance or whatever happens to be black, sometimes the way that we express ourselves is really, really different from what's like considered like appropriate in North America. Like when you go to when you go to like a North American funeral, everybody's like quiet and like gently sobbing, whereas if when you go to a Ghanaian funeral, you have a lot of like screaming and dancing and things like that. And so you might have that like total, like you might have that difference being interpreted, um or or like that variance in communication being interpreted as like disruptive or overblown or things like that. And I think that's kind of something that might be important for educators to kind of understand, that the way that, like if they're looking at a kid and all they see is like a black kid, and they just like assume that the culture that they come from is equal to, I guess, the culture that um I guess like they're like, I don't know, Canadian culture or whatever, just making that assumption is going to do like that kid a disservice. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but what you're describing has a name. It's called racism. So when you look at other folks and you decide that based on their skin color, you're going to have an aversion to their way of behaving, it's called stereotyping. It's called racism. Um, it doesn't, black people, for example, if you're a black person and you grew up in an upper middle class community where
Mhm.
you were taught to suppress, to behave in a different kind of way, you're going to behave in that way. But when you look at someone, whether it's in a nursing home or in a hospital or in a school, and you see black people, and the moment you see me coming, you begin to think that I'm going to be loud, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. It's called racism. It's called
Mhm.
stereotyping. Black people are entitled to be who they want to be. I am entitled to
Mhm.
laugh how I choose to laugh, to cry how I choose to cry. That is all part of white supremacy. That's all part of the colonial project to tell us how
Okay.
to be. That is all part of colonization that we're going to get rid of. It is the colonial project that says, you must gently sob like I don't know what. We are free to cry how we choose to cry. If I choose to
Mhm.
wail and roll around, create space for me to wail and roll around. And these are the things, and these kind of stereotypes, Ezra, if I'm saying your name correctly, these
Yep.
kinds of stereotypes really is what people then act on. And so before you come through the door, and I know there is time, and I'll quickly share this quickly, 5 seconds is 5 o'clock, and we have all these questions
Mhm.
to get. Lindy, I'll stay an extra 15 minutes or so. I was uh, at the time, at OISE in charge of a teaching cohort, and I had gone to
Mhm.
the school in August to set up the classroom. I walked in, I'm a black woman, and I asked to speak to a particular vice principal. And the secretary, without looking up, looked at me and said, "What child are you here for? Which child are you here for?"
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I said, "I'm not here for a child. Have a seat, have a seat." I said, I really don't like sitting. I'd much prefer to stand. She said, "Have a seat." Then I turned to her and I said, "You know what she assumed? She assumed that I was a
You were
black
a parent.
parent who was there for a problem child to,
Mhm.
how they bring parents in to make sort of plan for the next year." And I turned to her and I said,
Yeah.
"No, I am XYZ and I'm here to see XYZ person so that I could set up my classroom as the professor from OISE who will be working with teachers." And her whole demeanor changed.
Mhm.
So that there is an act of, we call that aggression, we call it racism, we call it, can you imagine if but let's just say I was a parent going in to talk about my child. That is a perfect example of anti-Black racism. She's already disrespecting this parent. They have not
Yeah.
even had a conversation.
Anne,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you again because I know that
Mhm.
we've got all these questions, but several of the participants also said they really would like you to go over your slides on how, because people feel
Okay.
like they really wanted to see that. So I wonder if we have a way of sort of
Thank you.
dealing with the questions very last. We are losing some participants because we told them 1 hour, and I know some
Yeah.
people have gone to the EDFO town hall. So maybe we could just, I
Okay.
hate to interrupt in the middle of answering all these questions, but I'm just wondering about that how that a lot of people are really itching for.
Okay, I love it, Linda. This is what we mean by really sort of responding. So I love it. It's organic. It's great. So in terms of some of the how, so here are some of the strategies that I'd like to share to have this work embedded. And so, first of all, create space for students to talk about how they're feeling, connect with their emotions, and it can be done face to face or online. So, this is really ask students, do not, even if the kid is, because the problem that Black kids have in school, and I'm just going to say my granddaughters have the same issue in schools, and they're 12, is this idea that some teachers really have notions about Black people and Black kids, as Ezra was saying, and act on those. So let's, as of, when you see your colleagues, say, no, ask, build that relationship. And don't shame kids, really remember, I'm going to say something that I say to teacher candidates. When Black kids come in school, I'm going to say when we walk into educational spaces, we bring our lived experiences with us. If our lived experiences in the society is one of oppression, when we meet white folks in authority, when kids come to school and see predominantly white teachers, they're going to think you're going to treat them just like the police, or you're going to treat them just like, they actually bring those feelings to the space, and they actually start acting on them before the teacher. So it's in the interest, the teacher now has to undo some of those really engage and understand ways in which Black students come into the space and what they bring, having been stopped 10 times or frisked how many times and all of those kinds of things, or just feeling being watched in the convenience store and the mall and all of the things. And they come into school and they don't bring trust with their teachers. So the teachers have to work on that. Intentionally dismantle the practices and policies that are racist. We were just talking about some of them. Your tone. I've been in schools. I was there for 14 years. I saw the teacher run down the kid for a hat. I saw them yelling and shouting, "Take off the hat, put this away." They're just, sort of, you know, it's just so disrespectful. And really, sometimes when the kids come into my office, they feel as if they're not human beings when some of the teachers speak to them, and the tone in which they do it. So watch the tone, and watch those, your belly feel again, as I say. I say intentionally rebuild and create policies that respond to anti-Black racism, and invite the Black students and families into the process of teaching and learning in our classroom. And I think that's what that question was about. Another how is, do not be a bystander when Black kids are being unfairly treated. Speak up. It doesn't matter if we think get rid of the good kids and who we see as the not so good kids. And even there might be one of your troublemakers. All kids give trouble, not just Black kids, but really advocate, see the goodness, go for the last ounce of goodness in all of those kids. We talked about teaching Black history at every grade, not just Black History Month. And of course, the learning, constantly engaging in the learning and unlearning. I would say, and maybe others might disagree with me, but I do not engage in this kind of work randomly. I plan it, I think through it, have resources, build it in your evaluation, really understand what it is that you're trying to do. I think sometimes with all of what's going on and all of the Twitter frenzy, everybody's an specialist. You can't just go in and wing it. I don't think so, because you run the risk of running into trouble. So I think it's to be planned. It's okay. It can be scaffolded and so on. And the last thing I'm going to say, please know what you don't know. and ask for support. If you're an Asian teacher and you really have in this community, you don't live there, you don't understand the kids, it's okay to call up critical. For instance, you know what, I am an Asian person, I really have not spent a lot of time in Black community, or this kid is really giving me a hard time and I need some help. Know what you don't know and ask for help. Change the language. I've talked about the minority, equity seeking, the mistreatment, and all of the things that we use. Be able to separate anti-Black racism from racism in general. So it's so important now in this moment to understand how Black kids are experiencing racism in schools differently from other kids. So that's something to be mindful of, to know what it is, Engage in honest conversations about race. I'm so happy for this moment. I cannot tell you how happy I am that we can be having with educators across the world conversations about race in ways that disrupts some of the thinking, some of the practices, some of the stereotypes and prejudices, and we can have real, deep, meaningful conversations where I can say, this is how I'm feeling, and I'd like you to stop. Of course, this is a big one, the N word. And then, of course, so, engaging with students while rappers say the N word and we can't say it. Listen, my take is don't say it. The rappers who say it are ill-advised. It's a word that means harm. It's offensive. It's hurtful. So that's my take on the N word. The other piece I would say as a how, believe Black students. A lot of times when I was an administrator, Black kids would tell me the teachers don't believe them when they're telling the truth. And then they force them to lie. Because if they tell the truth and they're not believed, then they resort to lies. Start believing when they tell you. The other piece is we're all talking about Black Lives Matter. I've said if teachers cannot explain why Black Lives Matter and not all lives matter, Black Lives Matter means recognizes the historical ways in which Black people have been dehumanized, murdered, hurt, being made indispensable. When we say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean other lives do not matter. All we are saying as Black people, stop killing us when you see us and think that we're indispensable, that you can just shoot us and it's okay. So, or suspend us, or however the case may be. So that's an important piece as well. The other piece I would say as a how, let Black excellence guide the teaching. If you're looking at the news, you would know that a doctor from Nigeria is one of the doctors who came up with the Pfizer vaccine. Let Black excellence guide your teaching every day in your class. Have some sense of something to show Black excellence so the students can see themselves and they themselves know they can be great. Look at them, even when they don't believe. Us teachers have to make kids believe. We have to help them to believe. No, I'm not going to allow you to stay out there and play basketball and not go to chemistry. Under no circumstances, I am going to hold you accountable because I can see your potential. Come along, James. We are going to chemistry class and really, and after a while they would kind of resist a little bit. You know what? I think she really cares about me. I think I'm gonna go do chemistry. And of course, for me, I always send, please, when you do the feedback, it's a question, it's something I have of you. Do not speak of my passion. We have a way of positioning Black people as passionate and we're emotional. No, speak of our knowledge. Speak of the skills and knowledge that we bring as Black people. So as of today, commend the students on the skills and knowledge that they bring and not necessarily on the passion, because we're all times, it's one of the stereotype. I actually had, I won't say where, but we were having a workshop one time and somebody, I won't say who, because I don't want to give away too much, and others were given other workshops to do, and the person in charge came to me and a South Asian woman and asked us, we want to do the workshop on cooking. And we kind of look at her and said, sorry, we do not cook. So you're going to have to find somebody else to do the cooking, or you can Google it, without thinking. Everybody else got, let's do math, let's do this. She came to the Black and the South Asian person to do cooking. We're not cooking, sorry. We are more than cooking. So again,
just
yes.
before you go on, When you began the how, it said how continued. Is there a first page of the how slide that we missed?
Yes, there.
There you go.
Okay, I missed one. Okay, so on this one, and I love this organic going back and forth. I love how it's kind of just, not so scripted, and I love it. So the one of the hows to Lindy that really is important is that checking for blind spots. We could have a whole session on blind spots, because remember I said that anti-Black racism work has to be planned. You can't wing it. You have to kind of know what you're doing and really plan it and be intentional. That's the intentionality. When we're under stress, we run the risk of putting our foot in our mouths because we are not thinking the way we normally think. So be mindful of our blind spots, because our blind spots come from our own socialization. It comes from the things that we've heard our entire life. That is in the reservoirs of our mind. And when we're under stress, they might come out. So be careful of that. And I've talked about some of those other hows: stop channeling Black kids to sports and entertainment, not seeing their other strengths. I think I talked about some of that as well. And the greatness and the learning to trust Black kids and Black parents. Yeah, so that was the first piece of the how, Lindy.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, in the chat, everybody is saying that we need to do a part 2. So be prepared. We're going to have to do a part 2. We've lost a fair number of people, unfortunately, who had to go on to a different session. But they're all saying they want to come back for part 2, and they're all expressing gratitude for what you've shared so far. So do we want to sort of pull it together and then...
Okay, so absolutely. So I'm just going to end. I'm just going to skip over some of the calling out and calling in. I'm really just going to end on 2 quick things. The things in the chat, Linda, because I'm a woman of action now. I tell anybody, don't invite me into a space to talk. We've talked enough. So one of the 2 quick things in terms of action, I will copy off all of those questions in the chat, send them to you, and it could build your part 2. But as we leave today, I want everybody, and those who have left, Lindy, send them an email. Everybody needs to point to one thing that they're going to commit to, and to recognize that this is going to be long-term work. Do some things now, but really think about how we're going to sustain this journey, and how we're going to really hold folks accountable. So just to wrap up, to say that sustain the journey, being, we're not going to undo 400 years of oppression in one semester or a school year. Engage in the courageous conversations, do the reflection. There's something called collaborative mentorship we can talk more about later. That's this whole idea of co-laboring, have critical friends. But really, the naming, the starting, the framing, and the sustaining, and really students will do well, and every teachers will feel better about the work as well. So there, those are, I'm going to challenge those who are still with us. That's the thank you. And by the way, if anybody who is still with us can tell us where those thank yous come from, that would be great.
Not sure if anybody knows where these beautiful thank yous come from, but they look very interesting to me. Do you want to give us some clues here, Anne?
They're all from the countries in the continent of Africa.
Fantastic.
So Asante Sana is Kenya, and some are from different parts of Ghana. The thank you is Jamaican.
You don't have from Zimbabwe? That would be Tatenda. So I will add that one to your group.
No, I don't have.
And may I ask
you come from different places. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Can I ask you, before everybody goes, I just want to show 2
Thank you so much. Could everybody just turn on?
And can you stop sharing for a second?
Can everybody turn on their cameras who are willing and able? Yes.
Yeah,
Let me stop sharing. I did.
Well done. That was awesome.
So hopefully, folks could turn, those who are willing and able could turn on their cameras. And just want to thank you all, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing. And do not hesitate to email me or connect. This is what the work is about. I'm no expert. We're just dialoguing here to make it better.
Good job.
Fantastic. Listen, I usually share some final slides to let you know.
But I want to be a teacher again.
I'm just going to let everybody know that you will receive a little evaluation as well as links from the presentation. And Anne is also going to share all the questions that we asked. And we will use those questions to create a second session, because the engagement has been really incredible here today. So please also look at our next upcoming OTF Connect sessions. There are some fantastic ones coming up. And we've just been so happy that you guys were able to stay with us. We did go a little longer than we'd advertised, but really happy that you could be with us and that Anne was able to really address this very important topic. I'm going to stop the recording if there are some questions.
There's none better.